Or to the cloud. No, hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to the Blackletter Brunch. I am Raul Martinez, and our guest today is Paul Shaw, uh, uh, teacher, editor, and calligrapher. The subject of his talk today will be Rotunda, Southern European Blackletter, Italy, and Spain. Thank you very much for joining us today, Paul.
Thank you, Raul, having me again because my fourth or fifth Blackletter Brunch, but I think maybe only my second or doing Blackletter itself. Um, what I thought I would do is look at Blackletter strictly historically, not giving you the entire history of how it developed, but looking at its two basic variations and telling you about my journey in learning about Rotunda. So let me start by sharing the screen.
Great, that looks good. That's full screen. Yeah.
So just a very simple background, which I'm sure everybody here probably knows. Whoops, not let me advance. Okay, there we go. Um, Rotunda is often referred to as a Southern European version of Blackletter because it mainly occurred south of the Alps and the Pyrenees in Italy and in Spain. Though when it comes to type, you can find it quite often in Switzerland and southern Germany, but we're focused on calligraphy, not on type, even though I'm using a typeface for my title here. And just if you don't realize the difference between the Southern European Blackletter, the Northern European, which is often called textura or text. Here on the left, we've got an example of textura, and on the right, an example of Italian rotunda. And what you can see on the left is the letters are much darker overall because you've got many more vertical strokes. Letters like E and A and O are essentially quadrilaterals, while in the rotunda on the right, you can see they are slightly squarish circles. Um, and you'll also notice that there's more, what do you call it, feet in Blackletter in the textura. That is a little diamond shapes that start or end letters like U and N and M. And in Rotunda, there's fewer of those. There are endings that are flat often, and we'll talk about how that is one of the distinguishing characteristics not only of Rotunda overall versus black textura, but of the two major variants of Rotunda. So if we use their native languages, we got Rotunda in Italy and Rondo in Spain. And here is a quick sample of the two so you can get a sense of the difference. Now, you'll notice on the right with the Spanish is it's much darker and denser. And this particular example, it's very condensed. That's not true of other Spanish examples. And I've got some Spanish examples. I'm not sure where I got them from, but they look Italian to me, even though they're supposedly from Spanish sources. But what I think of as the Spanish version is much closer to what we're seeing here on the left, on the right. And one of the major differences between it and the Italian is those flat endings and flat beginnings are more prevalent in the Spanish version. You can see it like for the letter L right there. It's just a total vertical stroke. The letter I. And if you see the I here in this Italian one as a bend, vertical and another bend, if we find an L, must have an L somewhere around here. Yes, we go. Yeah, it's essentially flat though. There's a slight indentation and then there's the bend at the bottom. But you notice we're not finding the little diamond feet as in textura. There's other differences between the two. One is in the A, the bowl has a very high diagonal line in Spanish and much lower in the Italians. Let's find an A here. Here's one. Usually about halfway down the height of the lowercase bowls. and sometimes even very low. What else can we find as differences? The D, which tends to be uncial shaped, we'll also find Ds that are vertical or Roman. Is there a D that's uncial in this particular one? We'll find one later. The where's the D? There we are. No, that's not the best D to use. Well, what we're going to discover, here's an upright D. You can see that you'll find upright and uncial Ds mixed together in both Spanish and Italian examples. And I think which one's used depends partly on whether the letters are near it and maybe just on the scribe's own inclination to mix things up. But what I was looking for, and I'll find it later, is we're going to see that when the uncial form of the D, the horizontal stroke, tends to be very stubby in Spanish examples and usually a little bit longer in Italian ones, and sometimes even much longer. Most of what I'm going to talk about today is Italian rotunda, but we'll see that my career started by looking at Spanish, but what I know most deeply, and I've got most of my examples of, are the Italian version. It's the Kelowna Missal and the John Runns Library in Manchester, England on the left, which is a very important one to my own personal story, and the British Library's Sforza Hours on the right. The Sforza Hours, I believe both of these are entirely online. The Rollins one should be, because the Rollins Library has been very good about digitizing their manuscripts, but this is an image that I got from a slide from them decades ago. And I believe I got the Sforza one from an online version. Grendel's arrived just at the proper moment because the Sforza Hours page I chose specifically for her with that skull at the top. And I hope she appreciates this little shout out. And what you're seeing, of course, here is that the Italian rotunda shows up in illuminated manuscripts, including major ones. And what we're going to see is a lot of details of Italian rotunda that comes from cuttings of manuscripts. Because these manuscripts were often had decorative scenes, like I guess that I'm not sure what saint that is inside this giant letter here, but what happened in the 19th century is many people took these manuscripts, often epiphonaries and graduals and chorales, often intended for musical settings, and they would cut the pages out that had the illuminated initials. Sometimes they even cut out only the initial and just a little bit of surrounding calligraphy. And so places like the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and other places have entire collections of cuttings. In fact, the Met, about, I don't know, 15 years ago, did an amazing exhibition about master Italian painters who were miniaturists, and it consisted pretty much entirely of cuttings. And it's really too bad because I often want to see the rest of the page where the calligraphy is. So here are some more examples of Italian rotunda. These are cuttings, both of these. They're from the Fondazione Cini in Venice, which has a large collection that I looked at in the mid-90s. And as you can see, these are pages of music, and that's what a lot of cuttings are pages of music, because these are large manuscripts intended for a choir to gather around, and they therefore have very large examples of calligraphy. The larger they are, the easier it is for you to see how the letters were made, and also just appreciate the beauty of their form. Matter of fact, and I don't have an image of it, unfortunately, years ago, when the Society of Scribes did a visit to the Morgan Library in New York to look at an exhibition, Karen Gorst and I were totally stunned by one sheet on display with letters that my recollection has an X height of about an inch. We were wondering how they could have made such large letters with bird quills. I mean, even a turkey quill doesn't come close to the thickness of these letters we were looking at. But in 2002, I visited a Belgian typographer and writer, Fernand Baudin. And for some reason, I asked him, you know, about, making large letters, in the Renaissance with natural tools such as reeds or bird quills. And he said, no, they had metal pens. And I'm like, what? Metal pens supposedly didn't come, weren't made until the 19th century in Britain, like in the 1830s. But he pulled down a book from his shelf, flipped to a page immediately, and showed me, a text that talked about metal pens. The book was by Juan de ECR, a Spanish calligrapher who wrote a manual in 1550. And I'll have one image from it later in this presentation. So apparently, there was some way that large metal pens existed in that time, and that might explain the size of some of the letterings in many of these manuscripts. And also the crispness, the amazing crispness. We will see a detail from the one on the left later. Notice that crazy letter there. That is a capital A. That's a capital B. And this is a capital P. I'm not going to focus a real lot on the majuscules. I'm going to focus more on the minuscules because that's where the curiosity comes in. Here are another example, 2 pages from the same manuscript in a library in Parma, Italy. And although this is called Blackletter, there we can see it written out in other colors, such as red on the left. And there's a beautiful manuscript at the Morgan Library with some pages written out in blue. And I chose the image from that same manuscript on the right because you can see some more capitals. They're variations of P, that's a D, by the way, a P, an E, an S, an A, and another E. And then over here, we have an R with a little abbreviation mark. This is a lowercase v with an abbreviation mark. Well, that's an X right there. And on this side, we have nothing besides the giant illuminated P. And this very cool O. That's an O, not just a decoration. So it says Pontifex. And that's a decoration to fill out the line. Two details from the same manuscript, another cutting at the Fondazione Cini, chosen so you can see the decorative initials. This is that same B from the left side, just so you can see the context. These majuscules are in. And you can see all sorts of fine detail for decoration with the point of the pen or possibly the second pointed quill to do all this little circles and multiple parallel lines to go along with the little diagonals from the broad pen. Or another cutting, we can see once again color and capitals like this R, once again with an abbreviation mark. And that, I believe, is a capital D. Not sure. My Latin isn't, I don't really have the knowledge of Latin. I can figure out some words. That's a capital H. What else do we see on here? Capital A, capital E, another capital E, and notice the variation in them, little difference in the way, in the curvature of this stroke. And this one lacks the parallel lines. This page has a Y on it. Ys are very rare because you're usually seeing Latin text and Y is a Greek letter, but they do show up in words. Oh, now I'm forgetting the key word. There's a couple of key words in that have Ys in them. So we will see a couple of versions of Ys. We're saying that this is an ampersand or Tironian et, et. It's a symbol for and. It's not a form of R. There is a second form of R called a bowed R, just as there is in Textura. And if there's a bow R on here, there's a bow R right here. Bow R's always follow curved or round letters, whether it's Textura or Rotunda. So a regular R would be, I hope everybody's seeing my little hand as I'm moving it around. That's a bowed R right there. There's a regular R.
Yeah, I can see the cursor.
Thank you. There's a regular R right there. I got some arrows later on to help. Um, there's a lot of stuff going on in this one. I just wanted to kind of, go through samples of Italian, and you'll see that there's a lot of variation within the Italian over time from location to location, whether it's Padua, Florence, Parma, Verona, some of the major centers, Modena, Ferrara, some of the major centers of where Rotunda flourished. Um, but also from scribe to scribe, most likely. And some of it is not very good, some of it's amazing, some of it's just doing. Ah, there, wait, I missed that one. These two details are from the library at Piccolomini, which is inside the Duomo in Siena, and it's a little room with beautiful chorales. I forget 13, maybe 18 of them. It's a long time since I've been to Siena on display, and these are from postcards, I think, that they had for sale. So all they had were basically the equivalent of cuttings, large initials and a little bit of calligraphy. I've cropped them a little bit more to bring out the calligraphy. But the Piccolomini ones might be online now. There was an entire book that I bought back in the 90s dedicated to them. They're one of the most famous manuscripts of Rotunda. And what you see on the left with ink has started to scrape off or flake off, that's in a number of the Italian ones. I don't think I've ever seen a Spanish one with flaking ink, unless the manuscript had writing that was like post 1600. Uh, there are definitely Spanish ones, I think some from Mexico like that, where the ink is not as good and it does flake off, but the Spanish ones seem to have better quality ink than the Italians in general. I don't know how to explain it because I don't know anything about ink. This is this is a photograph from a friend from one of our trips in Italy, and it was labeled Biblioteca Ambrosiana, but I don't have a recollection of seeing a Rotunda manuscript there. At least I don't have my own picture, so I don't know which one this is from. It's a little bit fuzzy, unfortunately, but you get to see once again the density of Rotunda is not the same as texture. It's not as black because of the round letters. And when I say round, they're not perfectly round, as you can see. There is a bend, a break in the curve. Though there are some versions where the break is hard to find, like right there is a little bit difficult compared to this quarter. Um, and I used to think that Rotunda was not as good as texture because it wasn't as dense, it wasn't as consistent. It seemed to be kind of, you know, inconsistent, but you'll discover that my views of that have changed over the years. So some more examples, and probably in a way better ones than that first one I showed you. It was very condensed, the Spanish rondo. As I said, some that are labeled in my files as Spanish rotunda um, certainly look like they could have been Italian. And there's definitely a lot of connection between the two countries because the part of Italy was called the Kingdom of the Two Naples. Naples itself, and I believe everything south down to Sicily. So there's a lot of Spanish influence in Italy, and there might have been some cross influence back to Spain. And these could be manuscripts written by, Italian calligraphers, but in Spain or vice versa. I'm not sure. Anyway, there's one of the words where you often find the Y, lacrimose. You can barely see the tail of the Y, and we're going to talk about the problems of images and seeing what the letters really look like. I think these are the two sides of the same leaf. And the color may just depend upon the hair and the flesh side of the leaf or possibly just the quality of the image making. I think it's the same scribe. All right. So I'm calling this towards an improved understanding of Rotunda, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about my education as a calligrapher, especially in terms of Blackletter and Rotunda. So I'm a self-taught calligrapher. I started doing calligraphy sometime, I don't know, between ages 7 and 10. I don't even remember exactly, but I do know that I certainly was buying calligraphy books by 1965 when I was 11 years old. there was not very much in the way of calligraphy books available, even though I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, home of the University of Michigan. There just weren't that many in the United States. My father bought me Edward Johnston's book, which was still being print. I found it to be a really ugly book, and I still have never read the entire book. I've only glanced at it over the last 50 years. Instead, the three books that got my attention, I only had two of them initially. My aunt bought me Eric Lindegren's, I think, A and B of his ABC of calligraphy, a Swedish printer calligrapher. I eventually acquired the third volume when I went to college. One of them is all about type. I had the one on handwriting, a history of writing, and the one on contemporary calligraphy. And what caught my eye was the work of Rudolf Koch, Hermann Zapf, Friedrich Neugebauer, and others doing textura. But the book did have wand ECR in one of the two volumes. So there was Rotunda in there. And here's Wanda ECR, but not from the Lindegren book, but from another book, which I did not buy at the time because it cost $9. I didn't buy it till it cost me $75 in the 80s. But $9 in the 1960s when minimum wage was $1 roughly, $1.20, was a lot of money. Anyway, this is Wanda ECR. It's a woodcut. And it's kind of like the definitive example of what Spanish Rotunda looks like. And there's that I mentioned with the high bowl, the flat top of B, bottom of F, both top and bottom of H, with a curved bowl that descends below the line. That we'll see that's not always true in Spanish. An R that has a hook at the bottom, but flat top. That's definitely Spanish and not Italian. Similarly with an L, there's the L. This L has a little tick mark, which we find in some typefaces and some black letters and textura, usually as a way of separating it from other letters. The I is a dot. Most manuscripts, we're not going to find dots, especially in Italy, but there are some with dots that look just like this in Spanish. Very interesting shape, this particular dot. There's the Y with the very hairline tail. The Z, we'll often see a shape looks like a Z that actually is a abbreviation mark, but I've, used ECR as a model here. And they've got some ligatures. Most interesting of the ligatures is the double D, and I've seen that in the manuscript. I think it's going to be one of the details I'll show you, which shows you the two different forms of D, uncial and Roman. And there's a very short top to the uncial part. This is also from Treasure of Alphabets by Chickold, and I found it in my scanned images with no explanation for where it came from, and I could not find it online. I can't find my copy of Chickold quickly. But it is a rotunda, but I suspect comes from Urban Weiss's book, a Swiss calligrapher who did a book in the 1550s. And because we're seeing German for the language. It's a bit sharp. It has things which we don't find in the Italian or the Spanish manuscripts, these little spiky endings. But that is definitely a rotunda alphabet, as is this lowercase. Well, this little addition to the Y is a nice solution that I don't recall ever noticing before. All right. Well, those are some of the things that I have seen. The one book that I wanted to show you, I can't find my copy. I asked Carl Roars if he had a copy. He doesn't seem to. If anybody does, love if they could provide an image for me. It's Ralph Douglas's book. Ralph Douglas, a teacher calligrapher in New Mexico, did a book. It was called Calligraphic Lettering. Came out in 1969. It was a spiral bound book with a black cover, and his rotunda in it was based on something he owned himself, apparently. And since he was in New Mexico, what he had was a Spanish example of rotunda, and it might have been even one from Mexico rather than from Spain itself. But he also had explanation of how to make the letters. And I took his model as my guide when I did my Blackletter primer. The date here, 1981, for the book, I really thought the book was a lot earlier because I wrote the text in summer of 1976 after I graduated from Reed College. And I thought it was published after I got to New York in 77, 78, but my copy says 81 as the copyright date. It's a youthful effort that I'm both proud of and embarrassed by. Uh, but this is copied. This is taken from essentially what Douglas had, but I'm sure I added some things that might have been missing from his sample from other sources such as ECR and Chickold. And here are pages where I was trying to explain how to make it. And some of what I wrote, I think, is wrong now. Maybe it's correct for Spanish, but not necessarily. I think the letters are a bit wobbly. Here's where I talk about the flat beginning of L and other letters. And I say you should start at 0 and twist the pen. This is before Arthur Baker publicly began talking about twisting the pen. But I believe it was something which was my variation on what Douglas said, which was to change your pen angle depending upon the part of stroke you were doing. And that didn't make sense to me to have one pen angle for a vertical stroke and a different one for an angled stroke because you get a different thickness of stroke. So I came up with this, but it's not easy to suddenly bend, twist to change your pen angle at a corner. Uh, Somehow I think I did it back then. When I bring up Arthur Baker, I'm going to talk about him in a little while. Here's Ralph Douglas with two S's, by the way, in his name. So these are the capitals which go across two pages. So that's why the A is continued over here. I'm not sure why, when I decided to make a series of plates for teaching in the mid-'80s for my calligraphy classes at Parsons and School of Visual Arts, that I made it entirely, I used an Italian manuscript, I believe, as an example. I call it, I don't list the manuscript in my notes. I don't know what it was, but it sure looks Italian to me. And I don't know what it was I would have been looking at that time, other than possibly just more reproductions of illuminated manuscripts in books and seeing different forms than I'd seen when I was much younger. But one thing that occurred in between these two books was Arthur Baker, who put out his first calligraphy books in the early 70s, which were simply examples of calligraphy with no text. And if anybody brought up on Johnston or any other calligraphy book before that time would have been told, when you do an alphabet, you figure out what its pen angle is and you keep it consistent for all the letters. And it's the change of the angle from alphabet to alphabet that distinguishes them, along with change of pen height. And what Baker was doing in those books that wasn't explained was clearly somehow manipulating his pen. And finally, in the early 80s, he put out a series of books that began to explain how he was doing this. He did a series called Stroke by Stroke Calligraphy. He did one for Celtic or uncial. He did one for Roman capitals and one for Chancery or italic. He never did one for blackletter, but he did a compendium of calligraphic styles with his technique, which included textura and rotunda, and there was definitely twisting of the pen going on. And it was seeing his example and remembering how Douglas claimed you did it that, began to get me really curious as to, well, how is this really done? You can see here, I'm still talking about twisting at the end of stems and starting with 30 degrees. Well, in the mid-90s, 1995, I decided for various reasons to take a self-paid sabbatical and go off to Europe and look at manuscripts. And I had a couple goals. One was to really find out if Bartolomeo San Vito was as good as he was cracked up to be. And I talked about that, I believe, in a previous Blackletter Brunch. The second was to look at Batard, which had become one of my favorite versions of Blackletter. And the third was to look at Rotunda and figure out, well, how did they make these flat beginnings and flat endings? Did they have different pen angles for different strokes? Did they abruptly change the angle of the pen partway through a stroke? Did they suddenly twist it, as Baker was claiming, continuously through the stroke? Did they do something else? And so here are a couple pages from sketchbooks that I made back then. You weren't allowed to have cameras to photograph manuscripts. I was allowed in a monastery in Assisi to do so, but unfortunately that was a textura alphabet I was looking at, so I don't have photographs of Rotunda. All you could do was make notes with pencil and make drawings. So these are my drawings. The pages are large, so they didn't scan in one bunch, and you'll see 2 pages broken up into two parts. And sometimes I drew upside down and sideways just to maximize my use of the paper. So I'll apologize if you have to turn your head to see some of the letters in the next couple images. But I'd be noting unusual things, like where strokes overlap. I had always thought in textura that you butted strokes up, you didn't overlap them. Something that I've learned was obviously not true. Rudolf Koch did that a lot, and that's one of the reasons his texturas are so strong, and one of the reasons so many American and British examples of texture and calligraphy mediums are so weak is because they try to butt strokes up just at a single point, which often is not what you should be doing. You can see the overlap here in this E and this E, in this part of the G, here again in the E and the O. And then to get that little tick on this is a long S, but also on an F. It's a stroke that actually crosses over. And the reason I know this is because I could see the density of ink by looking at a manuscript actually in person rather than looking at an image of it reproduced in a book or a slide or a postcard. And today I would say the same thing about digital images, depending upon the reproduction source. If it's a good source, you'll be able to see exactly how the scribes made some of these letters. So here's the P overlapping. And odd things like how this stroke of the F is very thin, which means the pen was pulled, might have been made at a lower angle. It was a Y, fortunately, in this manuscript. This is a cutting. It means it was a cutting from the Cini, but the source was supposed to Perugia in this particular example. But this Y, the scribe has somehow thickened the tail and not left it as a little tiny hairline, which is good. X's often had hairlines. And I began to notice how the beginnings of D's and B's change. We'll get to that a little bit later. You already saw these initials, the actual manuscript. Here's my drawings of them. Here's another one from the same manuscript, turned sideways, these. I mentioned that sometimes in the Italians, the bowl of a rotunda A is very low. It's not common, but here's one with a very low A. And you'll find forked tops, which we associate with textura in some of them. And this is a clue to how the flat tops get made. The forked tops are possibly mistakes. 2 more cuttings from Cini. These they know who the miniaturist was, Lippo Vanni, and he was working in Siena. Matter of fact, in the Libreria Piccolomini in the Duomo in Siena, his work is on display there. So I'm not sure one of those 2 postcards I showed you was his or not, but you notice the early date, 1345. So we're talking about Rotunda here going from the middle of the 14th century into the middle of the 16th century. We'll notice G's are often of a Roman form with sort of a large butt kicking out, but also of the double story form, sort of an 8. And sometimes, as you can see in this manuscript, in the same one is both forms. In fact, I think I have an image today that has both of them on the same line. And we'll find that for some reason, the P often has a different starting stroke than other verticals in Italian rotunda. It often has this little triangle that we associate with like a Caslon typeface, in the large size, large N or T in the lowercase, a Caslon with this beak form. This S, we saw one like it earlier in the manuscript. I didn't point it out. And in fact, we saw that P earlier. Uh, is a final form, and it often is used to squeeze text into a line. There are several variations of S's that are designed specifically to fit within line length and not go too far into the margin. Some of them are S's that are hooked on above the preceding letter. Try to point one out when we get to one. Two more details from my sketchbooks. Another cutting from the Fondazione Cini in Venice. This cutting comes from Pavia, which, if I remember my geography, Pavia is a little bit south of Milan. And you can see this is 100 years after the one from Siena. This is now the 1430s to 1440s is their guess, the experts on miniaturists. And they even know who the miniaturist might be. I got fascinated by capitals, which hadn't been my original intent. And I mentioned the John Rylands Library and the Kelowna Missal. That might have been my very first stop on the sabbatical, Manchester rather than London. I think maybe because of the cheap flights that were being offered at that time. And I went to Manchester specifically from John Rylands Library, and this missal, which I had seen a page or two reproduced. And when I saw the thing, what knocked me out was that the scribe, I'm not sure if they know who he is, had at least 37 or 39 different versions of the capital A. And some of them were so bizarre, like this one, which is not from that manuscript, that if it wasn't for the word Alleluia being repeated over and over again, you would never have known what that was, whether it was a decoration, a doodle, or the letter A. And ever since I saw that, I've had this belief that the key to creativity is boredom. But that scribe was bored as hell making the word Alleluia. And every time I got to the A, he said, what can I do now that I have not done before? And he was very inventive. Another example of the finial S, this one that goes below the line, and it has these little sort of decorative strokes for its bottom portion. Okay, so after that eye-opening trip in 1995, and I'll show you details, photographic ones that I've accumulated since then. I did a 4-page, I think it was 6-page contribution to the Milanese, the Italian calligraphy group in Milan called the Associazione Calligrafia Italiana, for their little magazine they briefly published called La Operina. I contributed 6 pages that were trying to summarize what I thought I'd learned during this sabbatical. And so you can see some things where I realized how they made the flat stroke. So there were a couple ways. One was you started with an angle and you kept it consistent in the Johnstonian manner. And then when you got to the end, you simply rotated your pen onto the left corner, you pulled the ink to the right, and then back up again. And in doing so, the ink flooded into that corner. At least it was supposed to. But I saw examples where you could see the drawn corner and a little triangle of white. Another method was to pull the pen to make the stroke with an angle, and then to go back at the top and pull the stroke down either diagonally to cover, which might explain these little points, or there is a mistake. This Italian here says a mistake. Because one way was if you pull the pen sideways, you would then square off the top stroke. I think some calligraphers might have pulled the pen downward although holding it at a 90-degree angle, and thus created this forked top. Here's an example of what I saw, these little triangles at top and bottom showing up, which gave me the idea that people were drawing in some instances versus flipping the pen to another angle and making a stroke to clean up. And you think, this sounds like a really slow method to do things, but there's not a lot of writing on many of these large manuscripts, these musical ones, the chorals, the antiphonies, the graduals. And I think that being in a hurry was not the goal. They wanted to make really good looking things, and so they did a lot of fussing. And when I talk about, mistakes such as this sort of fork that appeared, I noticed things where when people pulled across, they just didn't go all the way across. They, they fell short. And you got this little sort of chip in the bottom of the letter. Or sometimes they did stick to the angle they started with, and they tried to simply turn a little bit, and the stroke bent and then got squared up. So there's a lot of ways, apparently, at least among the Italians, to create these flat beginnings or flat or nearly flat endings. And the question is, what is the basic angle of the pen stroke? I had said 30 degrees, following Ralph Douglas. I think I said it in my, back in 81, again, I think in 86. And yet when I actually began to measure some of the things I had sketched, I found pen angles running from 26 degrees to 33 degrees. And I'm just measuring N's and O's. And what this tells me is, the scribe didn't sit there and measure out exactly what the angle was. The scribe just, put his pen down, said, this looks good, and decided whether the letter looked good. And whether the hand adjusted, unconsciously or not, as different letters were made or as a stroke changed, I don't think the scribe paid any attention to that. And ever since then, I've not paid a lot of attention to whether I'm working exactly at a 45-degree angle for some style, or a 35 or a 30 or whatever. You make the letter, and if it looks like what you're aiming for, that's what it should be. There are other pages. I think this one you can see there's a 25-degree angle I found, less than the 26 on the previous page. And these are pretty much the same letters as I had done in 1986, probably from, well, although some of them come from very specific cuttings that I've listed. So there's two different V's here, several different X's. This X is much closer to a textura X, or the pinwheel form. Usually X's in Rotunda are going to be back-to-back letter C's, dos a dos. One of the really important examples of Rotunda, and maybe it's the one that I use as my model in 86, is from the Bibliotheca Estense in Modena. It's the Bible of one of the D'Este families, very famous Bible. And I believe it's been digitized and put online by the library in Modena. And it's got lots of pages there for many examples to look at and use as a guide. These are all from that Bible, except for those that I put the asterisk that I have added. And then, as I said, although my initial interest during that sabbatical was to find out how those flat endings and beginnings were done, once I saw that manuscript in Manchester, I got totally fascinated by just the wild variety of capitals in Rotunda. I don't think anybody can really say what the definitive form of capitals in Rotunda should be. It's like every scribe does crazy things. So I put a selection of some of the crazy decorations done. Also, you get things like this, where often the letters are not even touching each other. They're the strokes, they're flying apart. And sometimes they're flying apart to such a degree that you would have just thought it was a bunch of miscellaneous strokes, out on a page. We like a lot of sort of ribbon-like things, just up and down with the pen with zigzag motion, either concave or convex, or mixing the two. A lot of parallelism is done, whether it's thick strokes or thin hairlines added, existing strokes. Circles with little dots in them are quite common. Uh, you find strokes like this that are filling up the counter of an M. That's an M, believe it or not. It's been split in half. It's an unshort form of M, where the middle gets split in many different ways, you can see. The S, which splits in the middle, often gets some decorations at that junction rather than just a simple jog at the end. And then the last thing I did for that contribution block arena was just a page and a half showing every single E I found and showing them at the scale that I sketched them at. Explains why they're different sizes. You can see some of this sketch a very small letter and some an enormous letter. And some are very dull, it's just an obvious unshort form, and some are just crazy as hell. We've already seen the source of that one today. Studying with China. Here's the half page, others. So there's 164 different E's. Impossible to say that there is a definitive form, except for the fact that basically the uncial skeleton is under almost all of these. All right. Details. I have a lot of those. That's what I'm going to focus on. So here is the B and the A I pointed out earlier, and that cutting and pronunciated cheating. And the only reason I know it's a B is because it's the word beatus. It's an A because it's the word tab. So without context, some of the Rotunda capitals are just so ornate and essentially decorative elements. This little part, you see a lot of this in Italians, where they filled in the negative space that broad edge tool has created. Obviously, it's been filled in either with the corner of the broad edge tool or separate pointed with. So really it's like familiar with this stuff. And obviously, there's some decorations, but the same. I put some arrows on these papers to point out different features. What I'm pointing out here is this very thin hairline stroke. I mean, it's on almost every Rotunda page. You will not see it in a lot of reproductions. You only see this and this. You may not even see this hairline. Camera work of the past for reproduction. The printing of the past, those things disappear. There's just a scale of reproduction. But even at a larger or digital image, you can see how faint. And I'm assuming the calligrapher simply took the corner of the pen and just drew the ink out. And here, work on the corner of the pen and then down, say with B. So
Excuse me, Paul. You're a little bit muffled. I don't know if anyone else is noticing that, but I'm not sure if there's something on top of your microphone.
there's
Or
nothing, it's just facing me. I think it'd be a little in the back.
okay,
Yes. Am I better now?
a little bit, I think.
What if I turn up my volume? No? Yes?
A little bit, yeah,
Turn it up one more degree. So
yeah.
what I'm saying is that you often, in reproductions, or even when you're seeing a manuscript in person, your eyesight, you often don't see these little hairlines. And it's a problem because you often think that this is not an E, but a C. Some letters can be misunderstood. And when it's pink, you can see the hairlines are much stronger. What I was pointing out with the D here is that there's an overlap. Not, the paint doesn't show in the way ink shows overlap. You can tell because we don't have the little tiny corner where two strokes meet. I mentioned the P often has an unusual deep shape. This part of the P indicates it's an abbreviation. It's not part of the letter. It's abbreviated for missing letters. P. This detail of the cutting is really unusual. I've never seen another Y with this tail, big thick tail. Now, if you look here, you can see, remember the overlap of the ink. See a little bit right there, and right here, and right there. And this hairline, I think, was that far, but you know, my camera didn't pick it all up. Even this one, I think that far out. I'd say both are. You can see through some of the skins with the lettering on the back. I think photography, especially now, most of these were taken with digital cameras. So most recent ones were taken with an iPhone, digital camera. And you can see where ink is flaked off. You can see a little bit where this stroke is one of those that didn't quite get pulled out far enough. And here is the figure 8 form of the G and some manuscripts. This is one take I did with an iPhone a couple years ago. Fabulous exhibition in the People Museum in Ferrara. I did an exhibition, a ton of manuscripts all in Rotunda, all are really large. We'll see more from that exhibition. And some of them they know described as according to the notes. It's going to say it's a guy named Evangelista Tedesco. That means it was German. Germans are called Tedeschi, so it was a German origin somewhere. There's one of those S's that finishes, squeezes into the margin. There's the margin. That's a D, that's a D, that's an S, that's an H, that's an S, that's an R with a rotation. Another one from also from the same scribe, a different manuscript. And here are the two D's using the same line. That's very long. You don't usually see the D, but it's the beginning of the line. I certainly don't see this in Italian, Spanish, but in Italian, you don't see a longer top stroke. There's the upright D. Carefully see it. Keep. So here's an angle to draw down and then stroke, try pulled across, square off, but not perfectly that D. And here he used two different angles, one for the cross stroke and one for that. Line it up. There are ligatures between capitals and lowercase. Oh, here's another case, but not quite pulling across far enough. Sure. But you will find ligatures. I mentioned that it's possible. Like Blackletter Brunch. I've only seen maybe one or two examples of that. There's a lot of flaking of the ink. It's made for the course. But it really tells you a lot. Now, so you can see a little bit of white showing there. This one is drawn off the top. And here you can see where the angle kind of the main stroke is, and then there's filled in, partially filled in. We saw fuller page, P earlier in the sketchbook. Here's that S. I pointed out my sketchbook with ends the line, and we can see the originals. Here's an S where that room between the whole we both across the margin. And I think that is what you have to describe, come back up, coming around, and that's what that is. The paintbrush. A join. So this R was the flat top that just started diagonal, hooks up above to use cross stroke. And you can see little hairlines off the back. So it's interesting. I would have made a T-knit normally by going down and then this, and then I would have gone across. If I did that, I wouldn't have been able to start a hairline. What scribes seem to have done is they came around And then it's they seemed to come around and made an eye. And then they instead came down and then did that to a T crossroad. I would never have thought of that as a substance. And yet it kind of explains why you get bumps in these teams. I don't know what this letter is. I think it's an A. That's a P, that's an O. In this detail I photographed, I have no idea what the rest of the context. And here you can see how they would change sometimes the top of the letter through ligature, keeping an angle, flat. And you can see a little bit of where they didn't take on drawing these bottoms. The third stroke or second in terms of M or second in terms of N usually is not flat in Italian. In Spanish, it often is. Italian would bend, or in this case, it would stay an angle and have a hairline finish. There we can see the really peeling off, and we can see the curl hairline and pulling out. And I just showing you guys, there's another example of two G's and the same one, two E's. So well, the idea of variation of scribes getting bored, I think, is being supported type thing. Here's a Y. Scribe picking up that hairline tail. Because most of the time the Y's look like V, and Y's are very rare in the first instance. Some of the both R's have hairline. I think must have been added. The scribe must have made a basic stroke and then added it either just for decorative purposes, or maybe it's somehow visually filled in space. I'm not sure. It's very common on T's and F's to having made cross stroke to then rotate your tool and on the corner pull out this little hairline. You usually get this oddly forked shape with the ink being drawn out. What I said with the key, they didn't simply go just across to make cross stroke. And the same with the F. This stroke starts here and then comes down, and then the cross stroke is inside and not rather than out, which is not the way I would have made one in Roman or Italic or almost any other alphabet. Same with the long S. There you can see the drawing, and there's the angle of the pen. Here you can see the pull, attempt to pull, and they did fail. Here you can see another, keeping the angle, but it's ligature, drilling. You see those stroke, they're not touching up like that EM we saw earlier. So there's so much variation. That's what makes it so much fun. That it's not predictable, it's not consistent. Here I'm trying to show you, I believe a pulled stroke was started maybe a little too soon. And there we can see how this stroke was added after the rest of the P was made. I would start with all this and keep trying to move down and across. And obviously, you know, the scribe was trying to finish up this cross stroke and totally screwed up. I have no buddy was doing it. I was trying to do it. There's a gap. Instead of making a jog, I would come down, I would slide up, and I'd continue. And some of them I think were done that, but other ones clearly were not done that. There you can see information of giving up the P. And here it looks like the scribe started with the hairline, and then he stopped and continued, unless somehow the ink just, you know, broke up because I'm hitting the existing stroke letter. I don't know. There you can really see that you're pulling across approach and it's starting too late this time. This is common in Italian, the H in this way rather than still be dependent on here Spanish and Italian. These are from slides from the 90s. And what's important is that there you can really see drawing approach. Ink that have flooded properly. All right, a few details from Spanish. I didn't realize I had this much. And they're all acquired in the last 10 years. Two sources, basically. it's a single sheet at letter from archive and a manuscript of over several years because there are pages that are terrible and I would describe. It's a Reed College. And I didn't take notes on what these have named, but they are what I saw them years ago. You don't find dots on Italian rotunda as far as I know. Spanish you do. And here is an example. It's very low in the angle and thickened. So I don't know whether it describes something through it with a pen or maybe it's sort of slightly rotated. The pen like point. There's a stubby punctual form of D what earlier, but barely more than an O. And then here, of course, it's a combination of the two together, the same line. This is a long S without with a flag, so comma. And that's a C versus an E. Notice how faint that line is. Also, I almost think it was a double C, except the word is ascending and that. I just added this in because I was surprised to find, these three variations in the same manuscript. Everything on the left is really beautiful and uglier than the right. Well, I'm not sure that was sequencing order of the manuscript itself. But I like the way the yellow highlights were added. There's a beautiful bit of writing in red, very large in the manuscript. And very condensed, much closer to that first example, Spanish rotunda I showed you. Here is the typical high bowl, high waist bowl A. You can see the P is very narrow there, wider here, but the M is very narrow. Look at these strokes of it that I even touch it. So despite my talking about overlapping being very important, it's not always every letter. It certainly is the O. Miscalculation and turning the R to the F here is that RIA. There's that dot. That's I. Roman numerals, not a word. Long S T ligature. Long S by itself is a hyphen. This is not a Z. This is a abbreviation indicating what's missing letters, probably for that word office. Very odd to see the second stroke of a double letter being shorter than the first. I was told that my second one taller. This scribe preferred that way. There's the bowed R in the Spanish version. There's a regular R, and there we can see a little bit of how Spanish scribe made it and some sort of drawing and stuff. Spanish ones usually don't reveal themselves. Ink is usually much better. There's our X, back-to-back curved strokes. Some more examples, that's a capital O, that same double F, same scribe made earlier. Here's what I meant by an S, alternate form of S, to fill out a line that is above or partially above the preceding letter, and squeezed in next to it and send below it. And I just wanted to show you an OS ligature. OS after ligature, an O to a round level like a C or an E or a Q or a D, but you can do it even to an S. But for archive, really cool, dagger-like dots to the eyes, much more erect than the ones in the Reed College manuscript. And look at this little dangling hairline T. Now, in the Spanish one here, I think it is just a straight stroke across, not that extra way, number 4 way of making a T that I showed you in the Italian. T extend beyond the stem, this upward motion. And there's where you can barely tell that that is a Y and not a V. This is a Spanish start the V with this horizontal stroke. Unfortunately, the word is it's the same word I showed you earlier, an Italian manuscript, Latin word for tears, lacrimose. And so we know that has to be a Y and not a V. Here's a really stubby D and very large I, the counter of the E, much more vertical with the Spanish than some of the Italian examples. And a very curvy bottom to the Spanish R. All right, that is the end what I have to show you. Stop the share. I'm just thanking some of the people who took some of the photographs that are not mine, or the librarians and curators who gave me access to some of the collections, and then some of the major sources for looking at Rotunda. So if you're in Italy, definitely the Ambrosiana in Milan, the Palatina in Parma, the Estense, especially in Modena, the Cini, which is a private foundation but accepts visitors to its beautiful new library in Venice. The Piccolomini is on display in Siena. I don't think you can see them outside the window, the glass cases, but the lettering is large. The Rylands Library in Manchester, of course, went from archive in San Francisco, and that manuscript that Rob Saunders showed me a few years ago. The Morgan Library, you can apply for permission to look at stuff there. And they've got a beautiful Padua manuscript from 1436 that has some pages in a beautiful shade of blue, as well as red and black. The exhibition on display in Ferrara is permanent. I forget what the admission fee is, very cheap, a couple of euros. And then with permission, you could ask the Reed College to bring out whatever that manuscript is. I don't know what it was called. Just ask the librarian for what they have as a Rotunda manuscript. So,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Excellent. Um, did anyone have any questions?
thank
I'm going
you.
to remove your spotlight. There you go. And I when I was
I'm sorry, I was going to offer to take to field questions.
Solamente
have you
un comentario, Raúl, si me puedes ayudar.
sí, sí, claro.
Sí, que para mí ha sido especialmente interesante esta charla porque la rotunda española es la que viene a Sudamérica, ¿no es cierto?, en 1535. Y es la que se difunde aquí en Lima en estos libros antifonarios. Todavía tenemos ejemplos acá en los conventos. Y es justamente la letra, el estilo que más escribe Felipe Guamán Poma de Ayala.
Oh, ¿cómo se deletrea el nombre? Felipe.
Felipe Guamán Poma de Ayala.
Raul, can you do a summary of what Juan Luis?
Yeah, yeah. He said that he, that was Juan Luis Gargurevich from Lima, Peru, and he was saying that in the libraries in Lima, they also see a lot of Rotunda because that's what came to South America from Spain in when was it? 1539, 1530.
1535 más o menos, ¿sí?
Say, yeah, in early 15th century. In particular, he has seen manuscripts by the scribe Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala. So
Yes.
that's very interesting. And the style, I think he said, is the Spanish style.
Ujú.
It should be the Spanish style. The question is it that high style that I was focusing on? That one that is so really distinct, different from the Italians. That very dense one with the R that has the curve at the bottom rather than the top, and the L is just flat at both top and bottom. Is that what you're seeing in Lima?
Lo que ve en Lima es el estilo española, creo. Español y con los As con el diagonal
Muy
muy
arriba, muy
bajo
alto. Sí,
o muy alto
sí, 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 muy
y
alto.
también los Ls con la parte de arriba y la parte de abajo muy um,
Planas, ajá,
ca-
chatas.
cuadrados.
Así es.
Yes,
Sí, sí, sí,
yeah,
exactamente.
that's correct. Yeah,
¿Ya? Sí.
yeah,
Muchas gracias,
easy.
muy hermosa charla, sí.
Yeah, great talk. Thank you. Yeah.
If anybody has other questions or observations about, or about things they saw in the images I showed, there's all sorts of details that I didn't necessarily point out, that, about hairlines and just how certain letters are made. I don't know if anybody wants, if any other questions about some of that stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure, Sarah.
Sure,
Go ahead.
Cortez. Yeah, on about the second to last example that you showed in the antiphonal that had the red lines. I noticed that in the second to last example that the line was drawn with a break at the ascender for letter F, the one just before the arrow right there. There's a break where the ascender of letter F indicating that the red was drawn after. I mean, the letter, yes, I guess that's an S, an old letter S, um, is so. So were those guidelines drawn after the letters were drawn, or maybe redrawn on top of light guidelines?
Had to have been made first. There's no reason to draw a guideline which you can do writing. But you're asking why this is low?
No, the previous letter S, that one, if you go up, you'll notice that the top of it, there's a break in the red guideline, indicating that the
Oh, I see.
guideline was put in after the letter F, I would think. That would be very hard to anticipate and leave that in advance.
Right, the red was later because this there's music on these pages. I remember correctly. I cut
I
off
see.
details that I thought were irrelevant. I tried to straighten the image out. You can see this bottom. My photograph must be skewed because this one's not parallel. But no, the red would have been added probably by the miniator, by the illuminator. And so you can see also here that um, he tried to go around the P, it looks like. And here, past it. Um, Yeah, I mean the red must have been added later. Let me see. Yeah, we can some others. This is Reed's College. Yeah, here they went right through. They went right through the letters. And you can see because the darker red, it's a different shade of red, actually, I think. See, it's darker on top of this letter.
Right. So they must have gone over lighter guidelines with red after the thing was written.
Right, but the red lines are not really guidelines. I think they're for the music. So this is part of the music note right there. Let me here, you see what I'm talking about here, Sarah?
Hmm.
Uh,
So it's kind of like the libretto.
the staff.
The,
Stage,
the
right?
the musical staff, yeah.
Stage. And they went right through the black ink here, didn't they? Isn't that red on top of the black ink?
I can't see clearly enough.
Hard to tell.
Well,
Hmm,
So the note would have intentionally been put on top of that.
yeah,
no, I think the notes were done by by the scribe, and there's the red on top of the letter right here on
I
the right.
see.
Yes, I think all the staves were put in after. See, there's the red.
Hmm.
Hmm, yeah, I see. Yeah, you can see that it actually goes over the.
Yeah, I think the scribe
No,
notes.
Yeah,
Somebody put in the staves because they wanted to read it in color. Later, so the yellow's added later too. And we haven't done from really looks like. You can see I was trying to get rid of most of that stuff as, distracting from the letters. See if there's any others that are. See here you can actually see through the ink to the guideline.
Huh. It's funny that there the guideline is lower than the top of
Letter.
it's not at the waistline where I would expect the waistline to be.
Guideline is
Oh, oh,
this is where you start your pen, the corner of your pen.
I see. Oh, okay.
See, we tend to think of these letters as having a top and a bottom instead of a starting point. In a way, I mean, this is
Hmm.
yeah, if you ask me. I mean, and then then you would have this corner and here, sort of. Well, let's see if there's any other. And, here's also using my hand, not my cursor.
Much more useful as a place where the pen begins, where you set the pen to start the letter.
Let's see.
Yes, I mean, and that then kind of changes your whole concept of pen widths, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Then we get the red right across again, but not across this. That's weird. Oh, maybe this was added later. That's not part of the P. That's a note. That's not part of the P. That's really interesting.
Ah.
And it looks like they've pushed the letter I or whatever that is down so that it fits under the note.
No, this is an I. Oh no, this is a P. This is the entire this whole thing is a P.
Oh, it's a P.
So we pushed the P down so it fits under the note.
Let's see.
I thought that was decoration.
Ah.
And then after the red line, because here's the red line on top and on top and on top and on top, and here it's not.
Let's see.
I mean, maybe the person who added the red line did the notes, but they did the notes after the scribe did the letters, but before mistakes.
Right, the red was a design element that went over a guideline that was lightly drawn to begin with, and then a decision was made to go over it with the red as a design element.
Here are the stays on top of the red. I mean, that's the notes. So the question is, who's making, here's the statement through the letter. Red has been added after the writing, but is it added after the notes or before the notes? The question is, who made the notes? Scribe or the miniatures? Or maybe one person did all three. I'm just flipping back to see what else is in here. Yeah, see,
Was the thinking that maybe this was done with a metal instrument and the notes are like even wider?
saying that earlier that when we saw that Karen and I saw this amazingly huge set of Rotunda lettering at the Morgan Library on display. I don't even know what manuscript it is. It just seems so big that it's beyond what a turkey quill. It's like the biggest, I think, bird quill there is. And it said, Wanda ECR apparently mentions it in his book, Art Civilissima, which is, the book is, I had trouble finding it online yesterday through Google Books, but I swear it's online, maybe through Happy Trust or some Internet Archive. A Spanish book from 1550. Both its text mentioned metal pens. I mean, I don't know how else they could have made that as really quite large. Really, Chris, I don't know what metal pens looked like. Obviously, they were, the ones that Mitchell was making in the 1830s.
Could have been a reed pen.
I don't.
It's possible. Yeah, a reed pen.
Yeah. So Lloyd Reynolds used to do.
No, Karen and I thought of that, but we didn't know that they were even a reed for it.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe.
Do you think that it could have been a vulture quill? Do you think that a vulture quill could be that big?
I don't use quills a lot, and I've rarely used reeds. I mean,
I've heard that I've heard that they sometimes used vulture quills, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But
I was also I was also taught. Donald Jackson showed us how to, when the quill is when we're preparing it and it's still warm, to really press down on it, which widens it.
oh, I
Hmm.
see. Yeah.
so, well, I mean, I bring it up. I really like big writing in general, and with Rotunda, it really helped me to analyze it. And all of a sudden, the question was, well, how did they make this stuff? And I don't really know. I don't even really know about the production of musical manuscripts. It hadn't really occurred to me, sequence between the notes and the staves and the writing. That's why I'm flipping back through my images, but most of these are musical manuscripts. Um, well, this one,
I wonder if the Papal Museum has samples of the tools which the calligraphers used.
which museum?
The Papal Museum in Rome.
The Vatican,
Yeah, the Vatican Museum.
Vatican Museum, yeah.
Look at the Vatican museums has been their inscriptions. That's been my focus.
Hmm.
Been there long out. So I haven't been to the Vatican. It's literally 15, 20 years. No, so do they show large quills or large reeds at that museum? Is this Bruce Bishop who's saying this?
I'm wondering if in the Vatican Museum they might have tools from the calligraphers as they have manuscripts.
Oh, you don't know that they do. You're wondering if they do.
Yeah, exactly.
My experience, I mean, it's called a lot, but when it comes to the manuscripts that have been taken from the Vatican Library, the library is interested in books, not in what they call realia. And, I don't know of any library that has quill writing instruments, other than maybe 19th, 20th century ones. I have to check. I mean, when I've
The
looked,
Getty, the Getty Museum did have, at least at one point, a whole series of displays in which they actually had the writing implements of various times. It's been a while now. I don't recall exactly
yeah, I think
whether medieval or earlier.
thinking that, I know I've seen going to museums where they'll show you, instruments. They're general. They'll say, well, this is what they used, in the Middle Ages, or this is what they used, in the Renaissance.
Yes.
It won't tell you this is what they used in Padua, in the 1530s,
No, no, unlikely.
because they often don't even know, or they may just have something which, is general enough to give you an idea of the difference between quilts, reeds, and metal pens. I just wonder if anybody ever saved any of that stuff. I mean, even type, what's been saved is very little. And a calligrapher, once they used their pen and it was no longer functional, just tossed it aside.
Mm.
I mean, it's a good question. One way, at least to look it up, is to see if any library catalogs mention that they've got such instruments. They often call them realia, meaning as opposed to documents or books.
Hmm.
Uh, if you look in a digitized catalog, you can check for realia or objects, for writing, maybe say writing instruments.
Hmm.
Um, and the Vatican, places like Harvard, Columbia, British Library, National Library in Paris, I would think. I'm just thinking of, who are the places that might, the National Library in Berlin, uh, uh, or maybe, if any old museums dedicated this to the history of writing. I mean, I know the Pettenbach one is really new, the one in Austria. But
Hmm.
What might have been a private museum at one time. Like actually the one in The Hague. No, The Hague. Yeah, I think it's The Hague. It's called the Mirmano. It used to be called the Mirmano Westrinianum, and it was a private library devoted to the history of writing. It's now state owned. I visited it back in the 80s. And maybe when it was a private one, the owners also collected instruments.
Mhm.
I'm
The
just
Champollion Museum in um, Figeac in France might also be a resource.
Yeah, right.
it's a good,
Uh,
St. Gall in Switzerland, possibly. Their library goes back centuries.
St. Gallen, yeah.
St. Gall,
Um, a
Interesting
question,
research project. Yeah.
a question for you, Paul. Have you ever been to the municipal library in Arezzo? They also have a quite a wide, quite a large collection of Rotunda manuscripts.
we talk about courses. I've been to Arezzo several times to visit Monica. I've not been in the library. I might have walked by it, but you can find Rotunda manuscripts throughout at least the Italian peninsula north of Naples and maybe further south. I mean, probably further south given the Spanish influence, but my experience is north of Naples, and you can find them in a small town called Chiusi. There's a cathedral library that I visited back in the 90s that had a beautiful display. Um, as I said, Verona, I am sure that you can find them in Bergamo and in Vicenza, almost any. Pavia must be because that's where some of the cuttings came from. And I'm sure the library in Siena, I've mainly visited the Duomo and not the library there. There's also several in Florence. If you go to the Museo di San Marco in Florence, which is famous for the paintings of oh, I'm afraid his name, the famous monk painter. Anyway, there's a display or was a display.
Giotto?
Frangelico, Fra Filippo Lippi, San Marco.
An entire room devoted to manuscripts, and they were all in Rotunda and Pisa. There's a museum of I think of the Duomo there that has devoted to them. I mean, basically, I won't even see any. I won't even say any major city in Italy. I say any city in Italy that is famous for something artistically will have either a library or a museum associated with its Duomo or cathedral. It will have the religious manuscripts on display, and they will be in Rotunda.
Yeah.
The sources are vast. You don't have to go to any place fancy. And in
Yeah.
fact, if you write to some of those places in advance, you may be able to see things that are not on display. They've got additional ones, in person. I was able to see the right next row like that when. Well, if that's all the questions, then I thank everybody for being here and Raul for hosting this again.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah.
Next time, we'll play the Batard.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, uh, if you're interested in taking a look at Paul's website, it's Paul Shaw Letter Design, and I just put that into the chat. Um, And anyway, thank you, Paul. Once again, that was an excellent presentation. On our next Blackletter
Thank
Brunch
you.
will be on Sunday, February 8th. John Prestiani will be the presenter, and he will give a talk about the work of Jean Yi Wong, calligrapher Jean Yi Wong.
February 8th.
February,
Thank you,
I'm sorry, March 8th, excuse me.
March 8th. Thank you. You didn't want to be late.
Thank you. Okay.
I was
Thank
just
you
going to
very
say
much. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Raul, I'll just say that if anybody wants a copy of the PDF, I can try to get it to you. I say try only because I am having trouble with my computer with uploading and downloading things. But if I can transfer the file to my laptop, I can upload it to WeTransfer or some other service.
Okay.
People want a copy
Yeah,
of
try to
the
get that to
PDF.
me in the next 24 hours, and I'll include it in the recap. Yeah, that'd be great. Very generous of you. I appreciate that. So, okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And I will see you again next month. You take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Right. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
Kata.
Ciao, Raul.